This video is an introduction to prophecy and eschatology, but there is a lot more detail in my new book, Godmindbody, available now to read free on my website, robertensor.com, spelled Ensor, or you can buy it from Amazon in paperback or ebook formats. There's links in the description below. So, prophecy, there are two overlapping meanings of prophecy. Prophecies are divinely inspired messages for humanity, and they are also predictions of what is going to happen in the future. So God speaks and acts through the prophets who essentially channel his word and his will. Eschatology is the part of theology concerned with the end times and the ultimate fate of humanity. So the end times, the end days, and the last days are broad terms encompassing the tribulation, the wrath of God, the second coming, the millennial kingdom, the last judgment, and the New Jerusalem. So in some definitions, the last days and the end times began with the incarnation of the Word, Jesus. But in this book, I generally mean a future period. Um, the tribulation or the Great Tribulation is a future period corresponding to Daniel's 70th week, or most of it, and therefore approximately 7 years, during which people are prophesied to endure great suffering and upheaval, including divinely ordained natural disasters, earthquakes, wars, famine, and the oppressive rule of a tyrannical antichrist figure prophesied to persecute Judeo-Christian saints, as well as everyone who will refuse to worship him and take his mark. So the citations for that are Daniel 7:25 and Revelation 13. So although these 7 years or thereabouts will be generally characterized by crisis, peril, strife, and suffering, it's not true that every moment of the period will involve suffering for everyone everywhere. And some places will suffer more than others. That's important to understand. So the key texts when it comes to end times prophecies are Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, the minor prophets, especially Zechariah, the Olivet Discourse given by Jesus on the Mount of Olives, in the Synoptic Gospels, 1 and 2 Thessalonians, so Paul's letters to the church at Thessalonica, and the Revelation to John the Evangelist. So, to fully comprehend prophecy, it's necessary to examine all of the above, which I do in the book God, Mind, Body, because each text only contains part of the puzzle and was intended to be read in light of the other prophets. And the Bible authors frequently reference each other. For example, Revelation refers back to Isaiah and Daniel numerous times in ways that reveal new information about those earlier prophecies. So, as I go through each prophecy in detail in the book, there is necessarily some repetition, which, serves as a aid memoir, as a reminder. So, premillennialism is an eschatological belief in a future thousand-year reign of Jesus and the saints on earth, and that this millennium-long rule of the righteous will be inaugurated by Christ after the second coming and will be followed by the last judgment. So this belief is relatively niche within today's organized Christianity, but it is thoroughly scriptural in that Christ is described as ruling on earth for 1,000 years, end quote, in Revelation 24. So generally, premillennialists believe that end times prophecy, including the book of Revelation, is mostly unfulfilled as yet and awaits future fulfillment. As such, they're called futurists. But within the premillennial school of thought, there are pre-tribulation dispensationalists or pre-tribulation rapturists and post-tribulation dispensationalists. So pre-tribulation dispensationalists believe the church of basically the universal body of true believers will be raptured out of the earth to meet Christ in the air before things get nasty with the tribulation, then descend to earth with him at the end of the tribulation period to rule the messianic kingdom with him, in their new immortal bodies, right? So post-tribulation dispensationalists believe that the church must endure the entire tribulation before Christ returns. So there are also pre-wrath rapturists who believe that Christians will be raptured before God's wrath, which they generally think will be somewhere in the final 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week. So amillennialism holds that there will be no 1,000 year reign of Christ and the saints on earth, but that they will reign in heaven for an undefined period until the second coming on earth, which will then usher in the new heaven and the new earth that will be ruled by Jesus in a literal sense. Amillennialists tend to see the events of Revelation not as literal prophecies of specific events, but as symbolic pictures of the Christian life and its struggles. This symbolic approach to interpreting the book of Revelation is called idealism. So the Catholic Church, Lutheran Church, and Methodist Church, they all tend to be amillennialist. Progressive dispensationalists believe that Jesus began his heavenly reign when he was resurrected, and the kingdom age was thereby inaugurated, but awaits the second coming to bring about its full realization here on earth. So according to them, the prophecies in the Olivet Discourse and Revelation are already partly fulfilled by the sack of Jerusalem in AD 70 and are not yet completely fulfilled. So post-millennialism is the belief that Christ will return to judge souls after 1,000 years or, an undefined yet lengthy period of time that some post-millennialists believe has already begun. So some of them believe that we're already in the millennium. Accordingly, these post-millennialists do not see the rule of Christ as a physical reign, but as a time when Christ rules from heaven and Christian ethics prevail through the church. They are often preterists in that they believe end times prophecy was mostly or partially fulfilled in the past, especially during the time of the Roman Empire. So these different interpretive frameworks should be borne in mind as I explain the prophets in the book. But before you're reading about any of these prophetic books in Godmindbody, it's helpful to clear up some modern misconceptions about prophecy. So just because someone predicts something, it does not mean that they want it to happen or are looking forward to it on every occasion. So personally, I look forward to the parousia, which is a word for the second coming, the 1,000 years in the New Jerusalem, but I'm not, overjoyed at the prospect of what humanity must undergo in order to get there. My interpretations of Bible prophecies should not be misconstrued as threats from me, nor are they necessarily expressions of what I would like to see happen. In many cases, I'm saddened by the events forecasted and wish they could be avoided, but I understand that they can't be due to the nature of the world. So there is an even deeper misunderstanding to be addressed in that the modern scientific worldview does not believe that events can be predicted in advance without some recourse to the scientific method. So accordingly, many modern people don't believe in prophecy, at least not in its literal fulfillment, except perhaps by chance every now and again. So ideas about free will stemming from the Christian tradition also seem to contradict the concept that events can be known many years in advance through supernormal means. However, nowhere in the Bible does it clearly state that people have free will, defined as the ability to choose between competing courses of action without the constraint of necessity or fate. So this was a later theological addition, this, modern idea of free will, used to justify suffering by blaming it all on sin. So there is a lot of sin, yes, that comes with consequences, but people cannot really be blamed for it in the sense that they could have acted differently. So, regardless of what Christians think, the Bible and science are in agreement that free will does not exist. Neuroscientific experiments have found that brain activity associated with a movement or a decision begins before the subject is even conscious of making a decision. So, these results suggest that decisions are initially made on an unconscious level and are later perceived as conscious choices. The supposed contradiction between free will and predestination, which is the belief that all events have already been willed by God, in Christian dogma is seized upon by atheist critics who ask if God knows the outcome in advance, how can we be free to change it? In reality, will necessitates determinism because will determines what happens. So it's better to speak in terms of predestined will rather than free will or determinism. So character is destiny, and due to the creative power of the mind over matter, especially beliefs, we get what we will, even if that's the opposite of our conscious desires, and that is a function of our personalities. So, in other words, we may choose between different options, but those choices are predetermined by who we are. It's obvious from the Bible and everyday experience that people are made in such a way that they are free to flout God's commandments, but whether they obey or not is an inexorable consequence of their innermost nature. So, this freedom to defy God has been confused with the mainstream concept of free will. Our souls, the choosing agent, were made by God, so therefore, human outcomes are determined by will without infringing on the omnipotence and omniscience of God who gave them that will, who made the character in the first place. So, therefore, future events can be known if and when God wants to inform us of them. So, the best proofs of the doctrine of predestination, and for that matter, the validity of prophecy as a concept, are the many, many Bible prophecies that have already been verifiably fulfilled in history. So, events cannot be foretold centuries or even millennia in advance, down to the smallest details, if the people involved in them are free from fate and the outcomes are not predetermined by God. So, in God, Mind, Body, I outline and analyze some of these fulfilled or partially fulfilled prophecies, including Jesus' birthplace, the date his ministry began, his death, the mode of his execution, the Babylonian captivity, the conquest of Cyrus the Great, and his edict to allow the return of the Jews to the Holy Land, the once thriving Babylon's becoming a wasteland, and Judas's betrayal. So, in science, a theory is judged by its predictive validity, its ability to predict what's going to happen in the future. What are all of those fulfillments I just listed before, if not scientific proof of prophecy? The word empirical means based on experience and facts and things that observably happen. And, many, many of the events in the Bible that were prophesied have verifiably occurred. So please also bear in mind an insight of the second century theologian Justin Martyr, who wrote that the prophet's sayings and deeds were concealed by parables and types, so that only those who really wanted to know the truth would learn it by making a dedicated study of Scripture. So, in biblical theology, a type is a foreshadowing, prefiguring, or symbol of a more important later fulfillment called the antitype. So, the type often appears in the Old Testament and the antitype in the New Testament. For example, Yahweh coming in smoke, flame, and cloud to give the Ten Commandments on the third day, Exodus 19:11, and Jonah being swallowed by a whale before emerging 3 days later were types that anticipated Jesus' resurrection on the third day as the antitype. So there may be more than one type before the antitype appears. Something else to bear in mind. So there's a lot more detail on prophecy in my new book, God, Mind, Body, available now to read for free on my website, robertensor.com, spelled Ensor, or you can buy it from Amazon in paperback or ebook formats. There'll be links in the description below. Thanks for listening.